go. Okay. We're not live. I don't know how to do introductions. Okay, whatever. If you're here, you know me, hopefully. So I'm going to let these lovely ladies introduce themselves. But before I read you that, you should probably want to know what this is about if you haven't seen the whatever. Anyways, we're here to discuss Wuthering Heights. It's going to be a cage match, probably, possibly, maybe.
It'll be fine.
We're going to get along.
Be broken before they are even formed. So...
Kate has a very, very calming presence, so we should be okay.
I don't think you've done that many live streams with me and Evie. Usually when I want to live stream with Evie, chaos ensues.
I look forward to it.
Common denominator. I will let you introduce yourselves and your channels and all that good stuff, and maybe like you can talk about how you got into Wuthering Heights, how you read it, like what's your background, all that good stuff. Really, whatever. I don't care.
Cool. Well, I'm Tori. Hi. I think I'm in the middle. I run the channel Tori Talks, and Wuthering Heights has been on my TBR for a really long time, as most books often are. And it was a book that my husband is a huge classics buff. Like, he is huge into Three Musketeers, Les Miserables are some of his favorite books. He absolutely loves them. And he had told me, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, I'm ashamed to admit now, was like, can you please read Wuthering Heights? Because I really want to chat about it with you. I think you're going to love it. And I kind of put it off because you have to, in my world, you have to be in the right mood for a classic, you know? And I read mostly fantasy. So every once in a while I'm like, you know what? I want to read a classic right now. So I was originally going to listen to Wuthering Heights and surprise him for Christmas last year and say, hey, guess what? I read it. Surprise. Let's talk about it. And I ended up telling him a week before Christmas because I had gotten a certain ways through it and stopped for reasons that I'll talk about later. So he found out before Christmas. It ended up not being a Christmas present, but we did have a really good and animated discussion about it. I'm trying to be intentionally vague.
So you might tag team and sub in your husband.
Yeah, I'll just let Ben take over for me and he'll talk about, he would love that.
All right. Well, I guess it's my turn then. I mostly read fantasy too. This book has been staring me in the face on my bookshelf for a few months now, and that nags at me. I don't like that. So I've been wanting to read it for a while. Simply put, I found out you two were reading it, and I hopped on that bandwagon in like 20 seconds. So I ended up, I was like, hey, you guys are reading this? It's been nagging at me. I'm reading it too. So I ended up reading with the physical copy and the audiobook, and I finished it in 2 days because I was child-free. That definitely helped. And I did try and take notes with this one. This is a used copy that actually already had highlights, and I'll talk more about this probably as we go, but I still can't bring myself to highlight it. So I use cue cards to take my notes because I'm just that person. I can't mark my books. Can't do it.
Meanwhile, I can like a serial killer.
Teach me your ways.
Yeah, right. I haven't quite brought myself to actually writing in the books. I'll like mark them, like mark passages or whatever, and underline passages. Yeah, I'm not that crazy yet. Not Ted Bundy, okay? Yeah. So this is my original copy from college that I first read, and it is A Falling Apart. So I'm honestly surprised it did not fall apart entirely. But yeah, so these tabs are from this reread. And no regrets for my tattoo. For anyone that knows my tattoo experience, I have Wuthering Heights tattooed on my body, and hashtag no regrets. So thank God, honestly. So obviously, I love this book. It's great, and I still love this book. Thank goodness. And it's Emily Bronte's only novel. I will fight you, aka Tori, that She's the superior Brontë. Actually, in all honesty, Anne is the superior Brontë, but Charlotte does not hold a flame to Emily. I'll put it out there. I don't care.
Well, it actually might surprise you, Evie, that I would say, if I'm comparing just as far as the like writing style between Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, I'd probably give it to Wuthering Heights, to be honest.
It's very atmospheric.
It is incredibly atmospheric.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, anyone that watches this, it's a classic. There's going to be spoilers. If you haven't read the book, why are you here? So we could just go full spoilers.
Full spoilers.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like people are more okay spoiling classics because at this point we've all had like hundreds of years to read most of them. So
Yeah. Well, then I feel like a lot of classics are in the zeitgeist. So like even if you haven't read it, you know of it, and like
right.
Mhm.
like Les Mis.
You've probably seen a movie or heard people talking about it or college.
Okay. Anyways, but yeah, no, it's very atmospheric. It is so gothic. It's ridiculous.
Mhm.
And I would argue it's honestly I was cracking up reading this because it's just so melodramatic. Everyone is so melodramatic, and it's just everything is dialed up to 11, and it's simultaneously sad and hysterical and horrible, but I love it. So
Yeah, I laughed. This is probably the funniest classic I've ever read, unintentionally funny because of that. I think one of my notes in here was actually a comment stating that Nellie was the only reasonable, sensible person in this book. Everyone else was just like
A
an
mess.
actress or an actor on a stage.
Inheriton, like
Yes.
Yeah, as he gets older though. As he gets older, as a child, he irritated me.
yeah, I mean, he's a little heathen. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
get out of here.
Oh, my kitten is trying to get in my room. 1 second.
Perfect timing because my dog is just like, I'm gonna try and get to the cat's food, and he's done. But
Planned.
kitty,
Oh.
it's a little kitty.
He's a very naughty little kitty. Yeah, it's funny because I think I'm kind of curious to see how I feel about it in a month or two, because I will say it does take a lot for me to get incredibly emotionally responsive to a book in any type of emotion. Other than, if I'm reading a terrible book, then I'll be like, ugh, but as far as really just having strong emotional reactions to books, I don't have that experience constantly. So whenever I do, I often kind of stop and I have to think about, okay, why am I reacting so strongly to this book? And I was reacting very strongly to Wuthering Heights. And yeah, like you said, I mean, Nellie, bless her heart. I laughed a lot in this book too, in fairness. Like Nellie made me laugh a lot. She's great. She's like, if I was in this story, I would be Nellie Dean. I would be like, excuse me to everyone. And so I appreciated that Emily kind of gave us a little bit of a relief by giving us a character that was saying what we were all thinking the whole time, for the most part. And bless her heart, she's just trying her darndest to make to make everybody just like chill and just live. Like,
right?
We all just be together and be nice. So I did really love Nellie's character, and I was very thankful that she was the narrator and not one of the other characters.
Although, one thing that I vividly remember from my college class where I first read Wuthering Heights is we talked about the narrative structure, and it truly is a nested narrative. Like Nellie is the narrator, but it's actually
Lockwood.
Lockwood.
Yeah.
And I don't think when people read Wuthering Heights, I mean, you guys can like obviously attest to this or not. I feel like a lot of people are like, wait, what? This isn't Kathy or Heathcliff. What's going on? So
Bummer.
yeah, right. And he's just Lockwood of all the people was having me crack up from basically page 1. He's a doofus and an idiot
and a gossip. Like
and also he's in I totally didn't pick up on this the first time I read it. I forgot that he was totally in love. Like he was like, I think I love Kathy. Like I would love to marry her. And I'm like, oh, you such a idiot. But roundabout way of me, my recollection of college is the narrative structure kind of mirrors the writing that Emily did, because she published this under a male pseudonym. So this idea that you have this female author writing this story under a male pseudonym, but it's really truly Nellie telling the story, but
it's like a framed narrative within a framed narrative.
It's so meta.
Yeah.
Right.
I kind of viewed Lockwood as the catalyst to tell the story. I know it's like the nested narrative, but for me, it was just like the excuse for Nellie to tell the story, and that's what Emily was trying to really get across. He was just a pawn. Like he didn't matter. This story was about Nellie, Kathy, and Catherine, whatever, all of them, and he was just. I forgot about him most of the time, honestly.
Well, I mean, it's really weird. It's like such a secluded story, like with all these characters, that you have this character from the outside. Like that's the only way. Like, it makes sense for him to kind of elicit this story out of Nellie of like, oh, I don't know anything about this area and about these people, and tell me your story. And of course, because it's 19th century England, it's like, oh, I'm sick from the vapors or whatever.
Brain fever. Let's bleed out with leeches.
Yeah, right.
Solid. Yeah. I think it's interesting too, because if you look at a lot of the other novels kind of in this vein-ish, which I mean, I know they're very different, but a lot of people, like you're looking at, Jane Eyre, Jane Austen's, novels, that kind of stuff. This is a very, like you said, kind of intimate viewpoint, where you have most of the other novels are, we have this group of characters, and then they go over here and they talk to these people, and they go over here and they meet these people, and they go to London and they go to this place and they go to this place in the country. And, and we're getting like a whole bunch of different places and viewpoints, perspectives within the story. Whereas Wuthering Heights is literally someone from the outside being magnetized in and kind of getting stuck there. And you're in this very small space comparatively, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I totally forgot about the town, like Jimerton. Like it's a secondary thought of like, because you think Wuthering Heights and I always mispronounce Thrushcross Grange. There you go.
It's a mouthful.
Yes. That doesn't help with speech impediment, man. But yeah, so it's those two locations, and not to be so academic or whatever, because I guess I'm that person, but I just love how the two locations are, central locations for both like lineages of the Lintons and the Earnshaws, and then also the like generational stories of Heathcliff, Edgar, and Kathy 1, and then Hareton
2.0,
Linton, and Kathy 2. Yeah, so just love that.
Yeah.
I ended up comparing this more so after the fact to the Count of Monte Cristo. It has a lot of similar tropes to it. There's a lot of similarities in some of the characters, but by the time, and this might be a hot take, I don't know, but by the time I was done, like thinking about all these comparisons, this really felt like the country bumpkin version of the Count of Monte Cristo, because the Count of Monte Cristo, he's so elegant, suave. He is rich upon rich upon rich, and he goes through things meticulously. Whereas, oh my god, I'm forgetting his name. The Heathcliff, he was just like headstrong, went into it, ruthless, brutal, and did not care about anything. Like there was no, like he had a goal, but he was just brutal
He just
about it.
didn't care. Like he didn't have a
Yeah.
set goal. It was just like, I want to have revenge
Yeah.
because Kathy's gone and I hate everyone because of it.
Yeah.
So
It was just pure rage, whereas the Count of Monte Cristo just had like a suave feeling to it. So this felt like the country bumpkin version to me.
I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, it is I don't know, like this is not a romance. Like, thank God we all agree it's not a romance. And people that think this is a romance, if anything, it's a romance between Kathy 2 and Harrington. Fight me on that. But Kathy 1 and Heathcliff, sure, there could be a romance there, but it's a tragic romance and it is a toxic relationship. It is a how to not have a relationship presentation, whatever. I don't know, characterization. But that's just like half of the story. Like I don't know. I like how it's just everything's kind of fed through because you already meet Kathy too. And you already know of her existence, and so you kind of know the end goal, but you don't know how you got there. So it's just I like that structure. And yeah, it's just freaking Kathy 1. Oh god, Kathy 1. I'm pretty sure from my armchair psychology opinion that she had like bipolar disorder or something like that. Something was going on there. At the very least, there was definite neglect going on for everybody involved, not just Kathy. But
oh yeah, there was severe problems everywhere.
Oh yeah, and maybe that's maybe intentionally or otherwise. Maybe that's one of the like common threads throughout all the characters is just how neglect can affect a person's life. Yeah,
Mistreatment as well.
because of all the people, Harrington is the only one that actually cares for other people because he's taking the brunt of all like the physical abuse from Heathcliff for Kathy too.
So if I'm remembering this correctly, Heathcliff also did get abused as well when he was younger. So Harrington is more the example of breaking the generational cycle because Heathcliff, he went through a ton of terrible stuff when he was a kid, but he just turned into this brutal monster of a human being that was just obsessed to the point where it carried on decades after Kathy 1 was gone. And Harrington was just like, he broke it. I would love to see what broke it for him. Aside, like maybe kindness, the first time he ever got kindness, I don't know, but like I feel like we didn't get enough of how he broke that cycle in his own perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he kind of is I like how it kind of all comes back to he's the original owner of Wuthering Heights and he's the rightful owner, and he's the one to kind of solidify everything and bring a happy ending, I guess, to the story. So it kind of like comes full circle where his dad was a drunk alcoholic. So
yeah, I mean it's a full circle ending essentially because you have a Linton and an Earnshaw, you know, and they're kind of, whereas Kathy Earnshaw and Edgar Linton they had moments, but mostly they had a really messed up marriage because essentially Kathy married him not for love in the first place. She could say that every time she was like, oh, but I do love him. I'm like, Okay.
No. Please define love.
Girlfriend. So yeah, it was definitely a generational break the cycle at the end, which I appreciated. And yeah, by the end of the book, all I wanted was for Hayton to leave and to have a better life somewhere else. Like that was my whole goal by about 3/4 of the way through the book, I think. So,
which I mean, technically they do leave. They move to Thrushcross Grange,
Mm-hmm.
which, yeah, I mean, they abandoned the seed of like all that malcontent.
Yeah, and like the really surly housekeepers that they had. Was it Joseph?
Yeah, Joseph.
Like, I'm not sure I understood all of his dialogue.
Kay, if one thing I will say is for anybody that is going to listen to this, and Evie, I don't know if you've heard an audiobook version that you really love, but Joanne Froggatt killed this narration. Like it was her Joseph was one of my favorite parts of the audiobook. Every time I was like, can Joseph come back in? I want more Joseph lines, because she was just killing it. It was so good. And that was one of the things that I think if I had been reading this book, I don't know that I would have gotten through it. I think the audiobook I listened to was exceptionally well done. So yeah, Joanne did a phenomenal job.
Yeah, the writing in dialect is definitely a hurdle to get over. I would not recommend then reading Their Eyes Were Watching God without an audiobook, because that book is basically entirely, all the dialogue is in dialect. So, or written in dialect.
My husband just picked one for our next book club meeting with just some real life friends of ours, non-internet friends.
I'm not real life. What?
No, I can't. I don't know. You might not be. But yeah, he picked one called The Hoosier Schoolmaster, and I'm trying to remember who it's by. It's over on my other shelf. Eggleston, I think, is the author, and it's a pretty much unknown classic that did really well in its day, and now nobody's ever heard of it. But it's very heavily written in dialect, and I'm already like, all right, here we go.
Somebody needs to do an audiobook.
Yep.
Or your husband's gonna just read it aloud for you.
I would fall asleep. He can't read books to me. I fall asleep way too fast.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you, because I had to go back and reread because I missed a drop, like a pretty big drop of Kathy 1 being pregnant.
Me too.
That totally went over my head.
It comes completely out of nowhere. You don't find out she's pregnant until she has the baby. So
well, I went back.
She's been dying for this whole time. It seems like she's been dying for like 150 pages. And then all of a sudden she's having a baby. And I'm like,
yeah.
Okay.
So there actually is mention of her being pregnant in a very like convoluted way. So in my copy, it's on 154 in chapter 13, I think, but it's like not even half of a line, but it says basically that Mr. Linton's heart would be gladdened by the birth of an heir. That's their idea of pregnancy announcement. Like this is after they
hearing that part and not get it, like it didn't.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Yeah, because I like went back and I'm like, okay, this is the only part where they mention an heir, and like, is that actually a pregnancy reveal? So I Googled it. Apparently, that is their idea of a pregnancy reveal in this.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if that's accurate, but I was so confused.
Yeah, I was listening along and just, all of a sudden I was like, wait, and then there was a baby. Like,
yeah.
What?
Magic.
Okay.
I wish.
Right?
Yeah, and like she's on her deathbed, but yet she manages to get the strength to pop out a child. I haven't had kids. You two have. I imagine that takes a lot of like energy.
I wouldn't do it on my deathbed. No.
Yeah. No, not sure I'd make it.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of like that too. I one of the things that to me kind of I was so wanting, and this was a good challenge for me because I did recently a video on a character from Malazan, which it's of course I would bring that up in a discussion about Wuthering Heights, but where people kind of have this expectation of trauma that you know you can just kind of have the trauma and then you overcome it and then everything's great and whatever. Yeah. And I think this was a good reminder, this story, and Heathcliff especially, his character, is a good reminder that not everybody gets to that point. There's a lot of people that go through horrible things in their life who do turn and hurt people, right? And like that sometimes we don't get the overcomer story, and sometimes we don't get the happy ending that we all want for each other in those moments. And I think what really solidified, I wanted a redemption arc for Heathcliff so bad. And I think because that's just a natural, like we want to see someone better themselves and, you know, have a better life. But when he married Isabella, that kind of, to me, was the nail in the coffin, I guess, in my hope of a redemption arc, because that was another case where I was like, and suddenly there was a baby, because I was like, wait, Heathcliff is literally willing. Like, when you think about, he hates her, he marries her simply out of spite for her brother and for Kathy, in a way, indirectly. And then, like, I'm just like, it was so far removed from any scrap of what I had hoped would be his like turning around, and then has the audacity to call Linton's mother a very unkind name, like the first time he sees his son. And I'm like, well, guess who got her pregnant, friend? Like, really? So it was, yeah, like Heathcliff just continual major downhill slope through the whole book for me, and I was mad about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that Kathy was the only thing keeping him, well, I would argue that they were the only, Kathy and Heathcliff were the only two keeping each other sane, and separating them was just detrimental to both of them. Because I feel like when Kathy goes to Thrushcross Grange, and she's separated from Heathcliff while she's recuperating from her
whatever
brain fever,
whatever.
hip leeches.
Oh no, it was the ankle, when the dog like bit her ankle or whatever.
Oh yeah,
right.
Like, so she's learned. I don't know. I feel like it's like this. Again, I feel like there's something from an armchair psychology point of view. It's like she was a completely different person. That she was just kind of presenting a not even a version of herself, but a completely different person to Edgar and to Isabella. And then, because when she comes home and comes back, Heathcliff almost doesn't recognize her, I feel like. Because she's in her fine clothes and stuff like that. Kitty.
Well, and sorry, go ahead, Kay.
Oh, I was just going to add to it, saying that she does put on an air for them, for the Lintons, and when they come to visit her, I think it is, and Heathcliff is there, and a ruckus happens. They're like, her true colors shine, so to speak, and the Lintons also don't want to associate with her as much after seeing her behave that way. So yeah, it's kind of like a two-sided coin for her.
Yeah. And I was going to say too, kind of piggybacking off of the armchair psychology bit, was just when you have people growing up in abusive, trauma-filled households when they're very young and yeah, that's the right word. My brain's like, word file. No. They're when you grow up with such an incredible lack of control over anything in your life, and you're constantly like at the mercy of everyone else. There's a very unhealthy switch that can happen when you reach adulthood, and suddenly you have a amount of control, but you were taught a very unhealthy way to use it. That all of a sudden you get things where you go off the rails and you lash out at people, and you know, so that to me, the response that both Heathcliff and Kathy have, Heathcliff goes and he gets the physical means to control everyone around him. Kathy uses her emotions to control everyone around her, but it's that same like desperation to control everyone around them. And that's something that it's manifesting differently in each of them, but it's the same like core to me, at least.
Yeah. And we see that carry over in like Linton, the younger son of Heathcliff. He was very emotionally manipulative. He, you know, had the threat of being physically harmed if he didn't, but he was an emotionally manipulative little word I won't use.
You can say shit.
No, I won't. There you go.
We'll go with that.
But yeah, he was extremely emotionally manipulative in however he could get his way. And it was like a switch. Like you said, it was 1 second he was like moaning and he was cared for and fine in his bed, and then she would attempt to leave, Kathy too would attempt to leave, and he would just like fall out of bed and dramatics and you know, turn on the waterworks, and she would come running back.
Yeah. And then he would just and once she was there, he became so much more like Heathcliff. Just with his complete and utter just disregard and just abuse of her. And she was the only one trying to like help him and nurse him back to health. No one else would, but he's still like lashing out at her, and it's just ugh.
Can we just agree they all need to be locked in that house aside from Nellie and Harton, and just like leave them there?
Yeah. Although
throw away the key.
You know, back in the day, I'm sure there was like something grown, like some sort of mold grown in the house that made everybody freaking crazy. So that was just making
Asbestos.
You're right. So I was thinking that too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like if you're thinking in that terms as well, it was a lot more social back then. You had to put on airs, you had social protocols, even to the point where you know, they go to visit Wuthering Heights a few times and they go, oh well, where's the serving maid or the lady of the home to serve us? And it's like, no, you know, you're on your own. And that was a big shock to a lot of people who would visit. So, you know, to see that comparison as well was really interesting between the Linton and the what are the names? The Grange and the Wuthering Heights homes. Seeing that drastic difference.
So, kind of going back to what you were saying, Tori, about control, like even physically limiting the access that people had to the house with the limitation of the servants, like keep it in the family, keep it close, keep it keep wanting
Keep it secret. Keep it safe.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, we're all in the same page. Like, I don't want to quote Lord of the Rings right now.
I did it for you.
There you go. Yeah, no, it's just that limitation, and the kind of funny thing is I finally read the introduction that Charlotte Brontë did for Kitty.
Sorry, she wants to be let out.
Let me out, but I want in, but I want out.
That was my other cat. My cats run my house, so.
But I finally read the introduction from Charlotte Brontë that she did to like the second edition of this, when she revealed that, oh, it's actually my sister. One of the reasons why I don't like Charlotte Brontë is she totally kind of just undermines the genius of this novel. And she's also like, she tries to make it seem like their lives were like Wuthering Heights, where they were so secluded and they had this like romantic lifestyle, and it's so, you know, it was just them. But where they lived is like where the Brontes lived. It was an industrial town. So it's really interesting to read this. It's like, because even in Lockwood's time period, it's like early 1800s. This was written in like 1850s, or published in the 1850s, I think. 47, 50, one of two. Either way. So there's a kind of that romanticization, whatever, the romantic quality of it, of the past and of nature, and like by limiting the number of people, you don't see like the effects of like industry or society, and you're just focusing on nature, the moors, and the storms that are going on, and it's reflecting in people's moods and the volatility there, which
Yeah, well, and the isolation of it, right? It's a very different element when the town you live in is isolated from the rest of society. Like I have some family out in isolated areas, and when we go to visit, the lifestyle is completely different. You know, the nearest hospital is 2 hours away. That's by car, you know, not I can't even imagine by horse and buggy what that would be. But it changes the mentality of the characters and the atmosphere of their society. And I personally find that really intriguing to see different takes on it, even from different environments, like you were mentioning with the Moors. You know, that has a lot more of a dreary tone to it. An isolated town can give a very dreary and depressing tone as it is, as you're stuck with the same people. Everyone knows everyone's business.
Yeah.
But with the Moors and the atmosphere, it definitely added a bit more of a depressing tone to it compared to if we were like, I don't know, in a flowery field, right? It might have they might have been a little bit more happy, maybe a little bit less hateful, but it would completely change the tone of it. Yeah, but the isolation of it, I found that personally really interesting to see that variance or that difference.
Well, there is kind of going back to what you guys were talking about before about, you know, the common thing in literature at the time was like the traveling. There is traveling going on, but it's off page.
Right.
You know, Heathcliff himself, he was found as an orphan in Liverpool, which you don't even know like where he's from. They say, oh, is he from the Americas? Implying that, oh, he's a Native American, or is he from India? Or I can't remember what they called it, but it's basically Indian. And it's just he's described as dark, and I know that there's a retelling that was written by Tasha Suri, I think. But she reimagines Heathcliff as someone from Southeast Asia, and like puts him in the same time period, and just rewrites it from that perspective, and that's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
But anyways, sorry, digress. So there's, you know, Mr. Earnshaw goes to Liverpool, brings back Heathcliff, and then Heathcliff goes out, makes his money somehow by being a douchebag and gambling. I don't know. And then Isabella also goes out as well to kind of get away from Heathcliff. And then Henley, he goes out as well, and he finds his wife, which that's another like parallel of he finds this wife of unknown parentage and unknown like society.
I never.
So, and I think she's a good, interesting parallel to Heathcliff, because he had no parentage. He had no, like, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Heritage. There you go.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, it's just. Also, they all had mommy problems. I feel like they all had mommy problems.
They all had problems.
Yeah. All the problems.
I will say, Isabella is a character that I wanted to bring up just because for the most part, she's also a tough character to, you know, she does a lot of complaining too. In fairness, though, one of the things that I thought was really interesting is she was had enough individual agency and self-awareness to remove herself from an abusive situation. which I think is really, I like that Emily Brontë included that in here, because it's like someone saw Heathcliff for what he actually was and how he was treating her, and managed to actually get out and keep her son, as long as she could, away from Heathcliff, knowing that he could very well meet, similar destructive ends. So, which she wasn't wrong.
Especially for the time. Like that's I don't think they go into, like, she doesn't talk about what she does to kind of keep them afloat. Because Heathcliff obviously never gave her money. Edgar, I think she had like a inheritance or something from Edgar that she could draw on, but that was minimal. So yeah.
I just thought she was a really interesting, I didn't expect her arc, I guess. So I thought she was an interesting, like, the more I thought about it, I was like, wait a second. So she actually, like, legit got herself out of there and, like, kept her and her son somehow afloat for, 10, however long it was, 10 years after he was born. So, I mean, she gets kudos for that.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if anyone else found this, but I found Kathy 2 to be a mix of both Kathy 1 and Nellie. She did have some of Nellie's sensibility, but she did also have some of that flightiness and, like, a little bit of the melodramatics in there from Kathy 1 as well. And I found that to be really interesting because she never met Kathy 1. So
Nature versus nurture.
Yeah, nature versus nurture. Seeing that contrast there was really fun. Didn't really like when, Heathcliff did to her, basically holding her captive while her father is on his deathbed for his ploy of vengeance. But I just love seeing that. What's that?
And Nellie.
And Nellie, yeah. And keeping them separated, and then just basically sending Nellie off and being like, toodaloo. Yeah, get out of my house. I've known you since I was a child. Get out. But yeah, I really like seeing the nature versus nurture and how Kathy 1 turned out. She was melodramatic like her mother, but she had enough sense to see what was happening, realize she was trapped, do what she could, and then as soon as she could, get out.
Well, and if you think about it, the two children that Nellie essentially, like, adopted, mothered, were the ones that turned out okay at the end. So, I mean, like, because she had a big influence in Hayton's early life, and then kind of helped raise Kathy too. And then at the end, both of them are at least mildly acceptable.
For the time period, probably.
The mildly acceptable, mostly going to Kathy too. Hayton's.
Yeah. But he's got money, so you can overlook his
right. Can I just say, it's not a romance, but I was a little, I could tell very quickly that they were going to end up together. I mean, it was kind of, to me at least, it was very obvious, like, well, yeah, of course that's what you would do. I was a little torqued about it because I was like, hey, you could do better. Like, because I think but I do think that he brought out the best of who Kathy 2 could be. And you see that at the end. It took some work for her to, and again, that's that breaking the cycle thing. It took some work for her to break herself out of those prejudices and that kind of stuff. But when he was trying to learn to read her favorite books, stop. I was like, okay, this isn't a romance, but that's pretty darn cute.
It's like looking over her shoulder and, like, stealing glance, staring at her, like,
when he was so proud that he could read, like, the name over the door frame.
Yeah.
And she made fun of him for it. I was like, get out of here.
Yeah. Sure. But yeah, no, I one of the passages that I marked originally when I first read it and still love it is just encapsulates why I love Wuthering Heights, and it's because of Hareton and Kathy too. The intimacy thus commenced grew rapidly, though it encountered temporary interruptions. Earnshaw was not to be civilized with a wish, and my young lady was no philosopher. and no paragon of patience, but both their minds tending to the same point, one loving and desiring to esteem, and the other loving and desiring to be esteemed, they contrived in the end to reach it. Like, it's, again, another example of them balancing each other, but actually able to be together and kind of, they're not, both of them are a little volatile, but not like to the point of Kathy and Heathcliff, but like they're a balance to each other, and I love that.
It's kind of amazing for how heavy and dark this book is. Pretty much the whole thing, that we get a happy ending.
Yeah, which we haven't even talked about. Like, we've talked about like how messed up everybody is, but holy crap, I forgot about holy crap, the level of violence on the page
for that time period. Yeah,
not even for that time. Even now, I'm like, holy moly. Henley putting the like knife in between Nellie's teeth and saying, "I will shove it down your throat." And I'm like, holy crap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A lot of violence.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I mean,
go for it. Like I was just gonna say that, but that violence is like, it's the volatility of everything, of the characters, and the even the nature of like the moors and the storms that are happening all around. It's just it's all so extreme, and it just worked for me. I don't know what that said about me, but whatever.
That's some of my favorite books. I'm like, yeah, this is a comfort read, and people are like, really? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed those aspects. It added, like I said, for me, this was a funny read just because of how melodramatic everyone was, but those themes sombred it quite a bit. And I think if it wasn't there, this would just be like a poorly comedic rehash of the Count of Monte Cristo to me. It wouldn't have had any of the tension or any of the suspense, or even any of the character development that we do get with some of these characters that we see. But on another note, my first note was in regards to, there were so many like snappy one-liners in this. So there's one with Kathy, saying, "If I were in heaven, Nellie, I should be extremely miserable." Nellie says, "Because you are not fit to go there. My note is, burn." There's so many of those, and I loved it.
I love, like, Hayton makes my heart really happy, but Nellie walked away with that favorite character spot. Like, I just loved her so much because she kept me sane through this book. Yeah. And there were so many times where I was like, somebody needs to say, "Oh, thank you, Nellie." So yeah, she was definitely, and the way to, again, going back, the narration of this really, I think, is a big part of why I finished the book and why I can see the appeal and the depth of the story. Like, the writing is beautiful, and Joanne's reading of Nellie is just so matter of fact, and so, like, you get this warm country, like, servant housewife vibe, but she's no nonsense, and she's very, and it was perfect. So every time she would throw out those one-liners, it was perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So great.
Yeah.
I will say that to totally change a pace thing, whatever, words hard, to give Heathcliff benefit of the doubt, or play devil's advocate, whatever that phrase is, there's a massive amount of grief that he goes through. I feel like there's a shift as soon as Kathy dies. Like, it's less about, he realizes, it's less about revenge, and it's more about, like, I guess vengeance and revenge are the same thing, but like his motivation is more about grief than just power and control.
Well, I think it also includes that a loss of purpose, because if you think about like why he came back in the first place, why didn't he just get out of there, take his money, and just go somewhere else? Well, he came back, and he came back because Kathy was still there. Once she died, that loss of purpose is like combined with the grief that he's going through. Because it's not just grief at her not existing in his sphere anymore. It's also, you know, he's grieving. We grieve relationships that we wish that we'd had. So he's also grieving that, you know, if things had been different, all of those things. I mean, it's so much on one person at the same time. And I'm certainly not going to play devil's advocate for Heathcliff either. But like I said with Fellison, understanding someone's behavior and condoning it are two different things. But I understand a lot of his behavior.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think there was a bit of guilt there as well that fueled it, because he was the catalyst that kind of sent her over the edge in terms of her health, brain fever, whatever it was. He disregarded her well-being, and that sent her over the edge. She didn't recover after that, and it only got worse. And for me, I always wondered whether it was more about self-hate and reflecting that back on the other characters in the form of blame. Right? So he hated himself for what he did, his choices did to Kathy, but he couldn't suffer alone. It was not entirely his fault. It wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Edgar. If Edgar wasn't there, it would have all been fine, and she'd be there happy and healthy with him. That's kind of how I viewed it. It was more of an internal battle that he just took way, way, way too far, and got way too obsessed with. Because again, isolation. There's nothing out there. You know, yes, he lost his purpose, but when you're isolated, and yes, he had choices, he could have gone, but if he left, he would be leaving Kathy, even though she wasn't there. So his obsession and the isolation of it, I'm pretty sure he was just like insane by the end of it.
I mean,
You know?
he did try to, you know, take her corpse.
Yes. Thank you. That's obsession. Absolute obsession.
Morbid obsession to the nth degree. So
at least he did leave it, but
yeah.
still concerning.
Let's look on the positive side.
Yes. Silver lining.
Yeah, and I mean he's just hoping that she comes back though. He's like, haunt me, Kathy, haunt me. Even before she's, you know, dead. He's like, haunt me till I die. You know, if you die, just haunt me. And he's like hoping. I remember, I don't know if it's in the book or if it's just in the adaptation I saw. But like when Lockwood sees like the ghost of Kathy, he's like, oh, where? Oh, I gotta see her. So, you know, it's like and it's just like there's this desperation there.
Yeah. Well, especially if she was kind of his anchor.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a desperation to get back to self, in a sense, too.
Well, I think it's interesting that, I mean, they always had that connection pretty much. Actually, they didn't really have that connection from the get-go, is when Kathy and Henley's father died, because basically Heathcliff was the favorite ever since Mr. Earnshaw brought him home, and he would dote upon him and treat his other kids like crap. And then when he dies, I think that's when like Kathy and Heathcliff like really start kind of holding on to each other against Henley, because Henley was just being a butthead and abusing everybody. So
yeah, and I think they mentioned too that they ended up realizing that they were very similar to each other.
Yeah.
They were like a mirror of one another. And I think there's a part in this where she says that if she did choose Heathcliff, they would just be basically a train wreck together. Like she recognized that.
Self-awareness.
Yeah, absolutely commend her for that. But if she could, this is the part where I kind of got annoyed. If she could recognize that, why could she not take some advice from Nellie and just chill, be a little bit more sensible, have some form of self-reflection and growth, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to starve myself for 3 days and just get out, you know. I know,
it's
but
the melodrama.
I had a sliver of hope for her until that. But yeah.
I actually think I found the quote. It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now, so he shall never know how I love him, and that not because he's handsome, Nelly, but because he's more myself than I am.
Yeah.
Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same, and Lytton's is as different as a moonbeam from lightning or frost from fire.
She saw all this stuff in herself and she did absolutely nothing about it. And for that, I hate her.
The worst.
Yep.
Yeah. That was, I think, why, like, I can understand and appreciate what this book is.
Mhm.
I have to be really careful with certain types of book atmospheres when it comes to like just the general mental healthness of it. And this one was, this was a book that I couldn't objectively leave behind when I closed it. And I started, like, as I was reading it, I was getting more irritable and really upset at things. And just, it was really draining me to read it, which is, I think, why, like, I can't say, oh, I really like and recommend this book, because I just, and that's, again, for me, a subjective thing where it was just like, there's too much in here that just completely drains my real life outside of the book, and that's what I don't want books to do.
Oddly enough, oh no, totally makes sense. Oddly enough, same experience for me, even rereading it. Like, but I'm the type of person where, like, again, I don't know what this says about me. Like, I like to feel that emotion while reading. Like, the books that elicit emotion from me that heavily, that it's like, oh man, I can feel something. Oh wow. But yeah, no, I totally get it. Like, why it's so violent. It's so just it's Wuthering Heights, man.
Well, and I will say, like, I actually understand growing up, I used books as a way to experience emotions and things in a safer way. And books taught me a lot about emotion. And so, like, I love when I get, like, using one of your favorites, Robin Hobb. I mean, I bawled through, right? Very cathartic books. And I loved that I was getting, I'm like, same as you. I'm like, I'm feeling these things, and I can identify what's triggering the emotions that I have. And that's really, like, healing for me to be able to identify that and have that experience. I think this book is making me try to figure out, like, okay, what is it about this book that is draining, as opposed to, because I mean, a lot of the fantasy books I read, Lies of Locke Lamora, Red Rising, Malazan, there's a lot of really dark stuff in those. But when I put it down, I don't feel like I hate everyone and everything all the time. If that makes sense. This book, I was not a nice person to be around when I finished reading the chapters. I'd put it down and I was like, and
I think, because spoiler alert for anyone, well, not spoiler alert, context for anyone watching this, we were sending voice messages back and forth, like messages back and forth as we were reading this, before obviously this live show, whatever discussion.
It's a fake live show.
Yeah, whatever, it's fine. Words are hard. But like if you count Nellie, there's really no redeeming
right
character. There's no, like, thing to latch on to that's like, this is the light in all the darkness, because Nellie arguably doesn't do a dang thing to anyone, but you could argue it's because of her station and, like, she's just a servant or whatever. She doesn't have the means or the ability to say, hey, you need to stop doing this stuff. But there are no redeeming like characters in this, and so I totally get it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why. I mean, I'm not sure if they're redeeming characters in Liza Locklear or anything like
Yeah,
that.
there are.
So,
Yeah. So I think that's a good point. And I think too, like one of the character emotion elements, I guess, that I personally really struggle with reading is gaslighting. And
everybody does it.
everybody is constantly gaslighting everyone in this book. And I was finally just like, like it was so, and I was having a very strong reaction to it, which I think, you know, definitely speaks to the how the book was written and the fact that it is having that kind of a emotional draw, and it makes you think. Like I don't even want to say a more fun time reading Jane Eyre, because that sounds really weird, but it didn't draw the same kind of strong negative emotions out of me as this one did. And so, I mean, I give her that. And it's beautiful. Like the prose is just, and the dialogue is exceptionally beautiful.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I am kind of similar in a way, because I kind of went into this knowing that we're probably going to see some stuff, right? I heard all the things. But when I got to the parts that made me laugh, I tried to focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I find a big thing, and this is probably just with my own brain, but a lot of the reason why I read fantasy and why a lot of the darker stuff doesn't really stick with me is because it's fantasy.
Yes.
My brain just puts on a switch that says, this isn't real.
Yeah.
Nothing in here is absolutely real, nor can you relate it to actual life and therefore your own life. With classics, I totally get it. It's harder to make that separation because this is our history. These are societies that we actually had. These were behaviors that people actually exhibited. So, like, that switch for me, I tried to change when I went into this. And I think it helped. It's just like a weird mental trick. But yeah, like talking about it in this way too makes all the funny things that I thought, like I put all kinds of random notes in here. All those funny notes that I put in here, I'm now like, yeah. And back to the funny. That was nice. But really, this is just a drama.
Yeah.
Right? If this was on TV, this would be like, I don't know, what's the Young and the Restless?
Telenovela, like
The
soap opera thing. Like,
yeah, it would be a soap opera.
Yeah.
Which is also very toxic, in my opinion.
Yep.
So yeah, I think it's kind of important to at least be aware of those things with your own reading, whether or not you have a switch for certain genres. And if you do your own little homework, because I know some people go in blind, I do it, but for things like classics. Sorry?
I said I usually do too. It depends on the book. Like if I'm even questioning to some degree, like even with fantasy novels, sometimes there will be things that come out where I'm like, I really want to read this, but I kind of listen to the chatter about it just so that I kind of have at least some idea of what I'm getting myself into.
Yeah.
So
yeah, like you want to have an experience with it. You don't want to take it home with you, so to speak.
Well, and I think Wuthering Heights, you know, if nothing else, is definitely a pretty strong warning about breaking cycles and about, you know, what happens when you throw yourself into revenge and, you know, let spite for other people. I mean, that it's almost like individual mob mentality. And like it's pretty, I think that was, I mean, I had a harder time with it, like you said, because it's real and I see that behavior around me all the time. And that it's harder to separate that, but I think it's still a really important warning to read this and say, okay, why am I having a strong reaction to this? How do I, you know, catch things like this in the world that I live in and try to, you know, contradict it.
Yeah. Trip and run. Yeah.
Right. How to not be Heathcliff.
Just spot them, trip them, run away.
You're right. Yeah.
How to not be Heathcliff. All right, that's gonna be my motto.
How to not be Heathcliff.
What would Heathcliff do? Don't do
Then
it.
don't. Yep, we'll make bracelets.
Yeah, it'll be great.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's a. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Yay.
I was just gonna add as well that we talked a lot about like the cycles and everything, but there was something I forgot to mention with how we're responsible for our reactions. Kathy 1 is a perfect example of what not to do. Be reflective, self-aware, and just having that self-awareness about your reactions to situations is so important. And she has zero skill in that, and she never obtains that skill.
So you don't recommend throwing yourself dramatically on a sofa and telling everyone why they're ruining your life?
Oh, and what should happen to them in the
Yeah.
afterlife if they
Yeah.
continue their behavior in that ill way against you?
I do. I love that. I mean, you brought it up earlier, but I love whatever Nellie's like, heaven. Like, it's just so refreshing because she's just, you can just see her like looking and just being like,
You're like, ugh.
You ain't going, hun.
yeah, have fun with that.
Yeah, but
and I think by the time we got to older version of Hayton, like he was such a breath of fresh air, to be honest. I was like, finally, someone has, there's a speck of goodness somewhere.
yeah,
Some sort of like, I think because he's like, again, nature versus nurture. He has the nature of a highborn gentleman, but the nurturing of like just he's a sheep herder and like
caveman.
he's working out in nature. So like he has like the common sense of like the land, and he has some sort of like sensibility about him.
But he was also raised, and maybe this is just me realizing this now, he was also raised by Heathcliff. If you compare him and Linton, there's a drastic difference between the two.
And Hareton was the only one that genuinely grieved for Heathcliff when he died.
Yeah.
That was actually really sad to read.
Yeah, his character is one I'd love to get more of his story or his perspective on. Like, how did he survive that? How did he break it and still have a heart after everything he went through? Yeah, he's the only one that we don't really get to see that with. Everyone else, we get their entire life story more than we need to. And they're the most insufferable characters I've ever read.
I mean, half of the cast of characters lives and dies in the midst of page 1 and page the end of it on. So
True.
his life continues. So
there was a point, I think, during Linton's stay at Wuthering Heights, the Linton 2.0, where I can't remember where that was, but Kathy was coming to visit, and she kept coming to visit, and he was just being a melodramatic child, and over and over, and like then she'd come back and visit, and then she'd leave, and then she'd come back and visit, and then she'd leave, and I was like, what's Hayton doing? Like, why are we here right now? Like, trying to care. I don't.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I think it's funny that the fact that Heathcliff and other characters tried so hard to keep Hayton kind of squashed down, and that in the end he came out on top anyway. Which is kind of, I mean, that is definitely an overcomer moment that I appreciate.
it's so satisfying, oddly satisfying.
So,
yeah, she's definitely a end game payoff writer.
I think it's interesting that just the imagery of Heathcliff being buried alongside Edgar and Kathy.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was
awkward.
I think it was Hareton that was like, no, I want him buried there. I think someone correct me in the comments.
It was brainwashed.
I'm probably wrong. But yeah, no, I like that. It just adds and like kind of is a good kind of not quite a bow, but it's a good addition to just the atmosphere of the novel. Yeah, we're just gonna end on this this scene of the graves. It's not the exact end scene, but no, it is actually. No, I think so, because Lockwood visits the graves, I think, right? Yes,
I think so. Yeah.
Yes. I lingered round them under that benign sky, watched the moths fluttering among the heath and harebells, listened to the soft wind breathing through the grass, and wondered how anyone could ever imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth, which is gorgeous. Holy crap.
I mean, is it bad if I say that I felt bad for Edgar having to spend his afterlife and burial plot with the two of them? He suffered enough in life. Like,
although, if the town gossip is to be believed, he's supposed to be going up to heaven, and Heathcliff and Cathy are still wandering the moors in their little ghostly aspects.
So he's free, is what you're saying.
Yeah, basically. That's what I'm trying to say.
He's enjoying a quiet night's sleep for the first time in his life.
Right?
Oh, good.
Yeah, I did feel bad. I did feel bad for Linton. Like, at first he was kind of a brat, and then afterwards I'm like, I'm so sorry for you. Like, because he genuinely, it's one of those things where he, I think, genuinely thought that he could love Cathy enough that they would happily ever after, and it just wasn't going to happen.
Well, it's like he only knew his mom, and then his mom died, and then he goes to his uncle. He's there for literally 24 hours, and then he's taken away, and it's like, oh crap. So
yeah,
I think too that's a good example of maybe not young love, but like the puppy dog love or the rose-colored lenses in that sense, where it's not really love, but that's how they define it. It's like that person is their everything. It is their world.
Yeah,
it's the obsession.
It's the obsession.
That's Heathcliff and Cathy. That's left to kind of fester, and I know that's that works. That word works. It festers. That puppy love festers into just this utter obsession that is just destroys everyone and everything around it.
Yeah, and it's just that emotional immaturity of it that never grows. No one ever learns from it. Well, aside from a few, but it just it was sad to see that cycle repeat in Linton, because I was so hopeful, and he suffered terribly.
Yeah, I should have clarified too. I felt sorry for when I was making the comment about he thought he could love her enough to have a happily ever after. I was talking about Edgar 1.0. That was the thing. I got halfway through the book and I was like, Ben, all of these characters have the same names, because we have Earnshaw and Earnshaw, because she doesn't call Hayton all the time. Sometimes she calls him Earnshaw. We have Linton and Linton, but they're from two different families. And then we have like Cathy, and then when I realized that there was a child named Cathy, and that Cathy one had a baby before dying, I was like, Ben, there's another one. I was like, that's my first one. I was like, Ben, there's another one. No. I thought she was gone. So I feel horrible. It sounds horrible, but I don't feel that bad about it.
That's hysterical.
No, I was so depressed about it. I was like, okay, we can focus on, and there's another Cathy. All right, fine. So, yeah. And especially since a lot of the characters that are, second generation are like Cathy, not Cathy Earnshaw, but Cathy Linton and Linton Heathcliff. And I'm like,
and Hareton Earnshaw. And
so I kind of have to add to this because it goes along with the isolated communities. In my isolated family, there's like 10 Bettys. And they're all married to different brothers in the family. So there's like, you have to know Betty who you're talking about. And just everyone has the same names. It's such a small community that everyone shares names, and it is so confusing. So there's the isolation again in community sizes.
Yep. Their baby name book is just a lot smaller.
Yeah. You will be named after your grandmother, who I was also named after, and you will name your child after me, and cycle continues. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just imagining a bunch of Bettys in a room together now.
Yeah, that's
raise your hand. Betty, what's wrong?
Yes. Yeah, when Ben and I went to college, we went to a really small Christian college, and there was like, I think the student body is a grand total of like 700 or something like that. And there were like a ridiculous amount of Mikes, Bens, and what was the other one? I can't remember what the other one was, but like there were so many Bens and there were so many Mikes. And like, so we had to start calling people by their last names and like giving people nicknames. And yeah.
For us, it was Kyles. We had so many Kyles. We called them by their last names as well, because there was no other way to discern which Kyle you were talking about.
My brother had so many friends in high school named Josh, and his name is Josh. So it was last name, last name, last name to know who you're talking about. So, and plus they all played football, and so it's like made sense. But
so it worked. Yeah. We were a bunch of theater nerds, so I mean, it kind of still worked, but
yeah. Anyways, we're a little over an hour. So, any final thoughts? Are you going to raise your rating, Tori, from 3 measly stars?
See, everybody. Okay, I am not a 5-star strumpet, and so I think when I give something a 3-star rating, everybody's like, "Oh, she hated it," and I'm like, no, like if I hated it, I would give it 1 star. like, and I gave it the 3 stars for the, like, it's as high as it is because of the prose. And I think, it's a beautifully written book. And
I'm giving you crap, by the way.
No, it's fine. I'm happy to defend my rating. I really want books that I don't feel drained when I walk away from them. And this one really drained me to read. And I think, that's a subjective thing again, but I just can't I can't give it more than that. But I was really excited when, I don't remember, you reached out to me first about this.
I think I mentioned it on like a live and be like, hey, you want to do a live?
Yeah, there's so many live streams and so many messages that go back and forth behind the scenes. I have no idea. But I really enjoy having discussions from 2 different perspectives, and I didn't hate it. So it's not like I'm coming in here like Alan was like, I'm so ready for this cage match. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to be like, Evie, your favorite book sucks. Because I'm just not that person. So
you like this book? You're the worst.
You're the worst. Your taste is like,
Alan's going to be so disappointed if he watches this.
I know, he's going to be like, this was way too civil.
Who knew that the internet can have, people on the internet can have discussions like adults?
Also, I'm 100% here for future classic novel discussions with the 3 of us. That would be awesome.
Same.
Evie's like, which one?
I have so many.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the next month, probably.
I haven't read that one yet, so
it's very short.
And it is short.
Yeah. There goes Yoshi.
That is one of the books that made me lose on Book Jeopardy, so I'm overdue to read it. So
I'm gonna need you cheering me in the comments for Book Jeopardy. I'm terrified. But yeah, it's like uber
short.
So yeah.
I keep meaning to reread Phantom of the Opera because I last read it in high school and I really loved it.
I just read that a year ago.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good and also very toxic as well. I think Shocking. I don't know if you guys saw the video. When was that? A couple weeks ago now, where Ben and I did the we roast each other's favorite books with 1-star reviews from Goodreads. And one of the ones that he pulled for Frankenstein just made me laugh out loud. And it was a what was it? A doctor and his creation argue about who's more depressed. And I was like, that is one of my favorite synopses of Frankenstein I have ever heard in my life. I love it so much.
That's like,
Have you? Sorry, go ahead, Kayla.
I was just gonna say, there's like those challenges where you try and guess the book title based off of a bad synopsis.
Yep.
That would be perfect.
That'd be perfect. Yeah.
But it is very accurate.
Have you guys watched the Book Jeopardy episode? This was from like almost a year ago, where I lost because of Frankenstein.
Evie, that's where I get you from.
Yeah.
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 I think I've binged most of the episodes.
It lives rent free in my mind. So.
Well, it's also the fact that Alan takes very great pleasure in the fact that he can trip people up on their favorite books.
Yeah.
So I fully anticipate. I'm waiting for a Red Rising.
Yeah. What was it? PhD student tries to find his buddy a girlfriend or something like that. Like I think perhaps like a rom-com, and I'm like, oh god.
You need to go back for redemption, Evie. That's all it is.
I mean, Alan has said, he's like, oh, you haven't been on Book Jeopardy in a while. I'm like, yeah, but I also don't want to embarrass myself again and like have to give back my reader card. So
Book Jeopardy is a great way to prove you actually know nothing about the books you read.
No. Correction. It's a great way to know that you don't watch Alan's channel or read any of the books that he reads.
He's that professor.
Really just it is. It's just a vehicle for his shame on everybody not reading the books he likes. So.
Here, this is a real cage match. It wasn't happening for Wuthering Heights, so we're just gonna now it's us versus Alan in the cage match in the video.
I'm good with this.
I will make a thumbnail and I will clickbait it for this video.
Specifically for Alan?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
And then he'll watch the entire thing waiting for the clickbait.
Yeah.
It'll be great. And then you'll get a higher view rating and it'll all work out.
And he'll just be, we'll get messages of like, how dare you?
I expect it. Well, he's going to come after me because I hated it. And so he's going to be like, excuse me, where was the vitriol? I signed up for this. Oh, well.
We all can't be so hyperbolic and melodramatic like any character in Wuthering Heights or Alan. So
that's rough. That's pretty rough. Well, thank you very much for having us on, Evie.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. This wasn't nearly as bad as the conversation as I thought it was gonna be. I didn't cry and be like, why are you hating on my favorite work?
Next time.
Yeah,
yeah, there's always never say never.
Yeah, persuasion. That's fine.
Are you a big fan? That's also okay. That was the other one I couldn't remember. All right. Challenge accepted.
Okay. Anywho, I probably should have said this at the start. If you guys are subscribed to me and you're not subscribed to these ladies, get over there and subscribe to them. Their channels are gonna be linked down below. And whenever the next cage match classic buddy read happens, I'm sure I'll link that down below as well if we have that discussion. So, or when we have that discussion, whatever.
You just need to call it a new series called Classic Cage Matches. Mm-hmm. See, I have good ideas sometimes.
I'm in.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
I'm pondering. Okay. All right. Cool. Thank you, everyone. I don't know outros. Bye.